Welcome inside this week opening edition of Big Ten Today, presented by Walmart. Rick Pizzo joined by Andy Katz, Autumn Johnson with us in just a bit. Now, Andy, I know it is officially the holiday of St. Patrick's Day, but to me, it feels like 3 days prior to my favorite holiday, that being Christmas, because we are 3 days away from the first day of the NCAA tournament, which to me, if I'm going to give you another list, is one of my two favorite days of the sports year, along with Master Sunday.
Yes, there is a first four on Tuesday and Wednesday, but the first real day is Thursday. But how beautiful is this? We've got brackets for the men's and women's tournament. This is also another reason why I'm against expansion. It fits on one piece of paper. We don't need like multiple pieces of flipping it over.
See these glasses? The prescription has to get a lot stronger if we go to 96 teams, because that type is going to get a whole lot smaller.
It's easier for everyone on one piece of paper.
We'll get all your thoughts on the Big Ten teams involved on that piece of paper. We'll do the same with Autumn and the women's bracket with 12 teams part of this year's women's tournament. But we begin with the big story, which took place on Sunday in Indianapolis. Michigan had lost 3 straight, really struggling at the end of the year heading into the Big Ten tournament. All the Wolverines do is run through the bracket to win the Big Ten tournament, handing Dusty May the championship trophy in his very first year as Michigan head coach, and obviously his first trip to this particular conference tournament. Now, it's interesting to see Michigan celebrate and then watch the seeding come out a little bit later, and the Wolverines were given only a 5 seed in the South. There were 4 teams inside the Big Ten that received better seeds, including the regular season champ Michigan State at number 2. Wisconsin was a 3 seed. Maryland and somewhat surprisingly Purdue were both number 4 seeds. Oregon, Illinois, and UCLA rounded out the Big Ten's 8 teams inside the NCAA tournament. And here are those 8 games. It'll start off with Purdue early on Thursday, Wisconsin not long after. Thursday night games, UCLA and a tough matchup against Utah State. Same could be said for that 5-12 with Michigan against Big West champ UC San Diego. And then you see Maryland, Illinois, Michigan State, and Oregon set to get their tournament started on Friday. Let's begin with the Big Ten tournament champions and Michigan. First, were you surprised, disappointed by the committee giving Michigan a 5 seed?
I was, and I just want to say something real quick, that it is really remarkable what Dusty May did in that program.
Finished last in the Big Ten last season.
2 returning players, Burnett and Cheddar, the only real contributing players. And they get a high seed, they win the Big Ten tournament title, and they also deal with adversity in the last week, losing 3 straight going into it. So pretty remarkable. And for Wisconsin to be back-to-back tournament title games with different rosters and different style of play. But yes, surprised they got the seed they got, shipped out to Denver. I know the committee would say for Wisconsin and Michigan, hey, not our problem, you play Sunday afternoon. But that's not changing, obviously, with television and all that. But it is a reality. And now they're going against the UC San Diego team. It's one of the hottest teams in the country. Eric Olin's done an outstanding job elevating this program from D3 to D1. This is the first year that they are eligible after going through that 4-year provisional period. They turn teams over. And if there's one bugaboo for Michigan,
all year long,
they turn the ball over. And Danny Wolf, as great as he's been, he turns the ball over. So this will be really interesting to see, how does Michigan control the basketball, keep it in their hands. I do think on a positive side, Trey Donaldson has played exceptionally well in the last week and has handled the basketball very well, going coast to coast for that game-winning layup against Maryland.
I just don't love the fact that not only are you a 5 seed, but you're in the same region as the overall number 1 in Auburn. You're the Big Ten tournament champion, and I know the committee says there are contingency plans based on wins or losses in this particular situation for Michigan or Wisconsin. I'm just not sure that contingency was actually put into play here, giving Michigan a 5 seed, shipping them out to Denver for a Thursday game. To me, there had to be other options there. The committee would argue otherwise. I know there are so many different things that they have to worry about when they're putting these brackets together. But you see that UC San Diego matchup, no matter who it is next, if Michigan were to move on, boy, A&M and Yale is a very dangerous 13 seed. As for Michigan's Mitten State rival, the Spartans got knocked out in the semis, but they still earned a 2 seed after a phenomenal year, won the league outright by 3 games. They're in the South region. They'll take on Bryant first, and then they get a matchup against either Marquette or our former Big Ten friend Richard Pitino at New Mexico. Your thoughts on Michigan State's early draw?
Okay, first of all, we kind of thought they'd be in Cleveland, so that's positive. So they get a closer regional. A lot of fans will be there for the Spartans. Against Bryant, Phil Martelli Jr., son of Phil Martelli, former Michigan assistant, former St. Joe's head coach, getting the Bulldogs there out of Smithfield, Rhode Island. Earl Timberlake, their big man, he'll cause some problems for Michigan State's bigs. But again, Michigan State rotates a number of bigs. They should win that game. Now in the next one, if it's Marquette, you've got to deal with Cam Jones. If it's New Mexico, you've got to deal with Donovan Benn. So this will be a real strong test for the Spartans in round 2 if they get there against the backcourt. We'll put a lot of pressure on Jaden Akins, Trey Holloman, and Jace Richardson.
Jaden Akins defensively has been awesome the last couple of weeks. He locked down a couple of the Big Ten's best scorers to help Michigan State go on that huge late season run.
So basically, overall, with these two teams in this region, I feel like at least one of them, maybe both, will have to get through Auburn. I don't see Auburn losing before the Sweet 16, and Auburn has struggled of late against high-quality SEC teams, but Auburn is still, for a reason, the #1 overall seed. They're deep. They've got potentially the player of the year in Janai Broom. So if the Tigers play up to their potential and get a reset here this week, it's going to be very difficult for either Michigan or Michigan State to beat them. Not impossible, obviously, but they're going to have to go through Auburn to get to the Final Four.
Well, obviously, it would be Michigan first,
right,
and then it would be Michigan State if it were to get there with a chance to get to the Final Four. We call that the Beeline bracket, as John Beeline was looking at that last night. He kind of couldn't get over the fact that the committee had Michigan and Michigan State inside the same region. That's one of those coincidences that just happens via the seeding.
Correct. One other thing is Michigan State was sort of fingers crossed if they were going to be a 2 seed that they would be in the Midwest, in Indy. That didn't happen. So they're in Atlanta if they get there. And if they get there against Auburn, clearly would be an Auburn-heavy crowd.
Yes, and Michigan State's also, much like Michigan, going to have to take care of the basketball. Tom Izzo told me on Friday his best guards are turning the ball over way too often. Actually joked that one of the passes had hit me courtside, which it did not. Fortunately, Michigan State made the run to the semis, got knocked out, but the body of work for the Spartans as good as it has been in a long time. So you have 2 teams there in that South region. We also have 2 teams playing in the East region where Duke is the overall #1. Wisconsin will match up with Montana. That is a Thursday game in Denver. And then they'll get the winner of BYU and VCU no matter who comes out of there. That is a contrast to style. It should be a really fascinating game. Oregon has a pretty tough matchup against Liberty. There'll be a guy doing some reporting in Seattle who is sitting to my left for that one as the Ducks take on the Flames. Let's get into Wisconsin's seed. Their trip also out to Denver after playing on Sunday. Where they're placed in this region, I imagine, listen, and again, there's always something for a coach to be upset about when it comes to seeding in the tournament. I imagine that Greg Gard, based on what his team did, especially the run through the Big Ten tournament, wasn't thrilled at what the committee did with Wisconsin.
Well, I can tell you, in talking to the Wisconsin administration, we were in the same hotel in Indy, they really assumed they were going to be in Milwaukee.
Yes.
They were actually making plans for alumni functions, what they were going to do in Milwaukee, and then it doesn't happen. And maybe it wouldn't have happened even if they'd beaten Michigan based on this bracket, when it came out and all that. So I think there's a lot of disappointment in Madison that now they're in Denver at altitude.
In an early game, by the way,
yes,
on Thursday. That's a 1:30 Eastern, 11:30 local time start for the Badgers.
Yeah, this is really going to test them in a different way than last year did, where they opened after the final in Minneapolis, trying to remember where we were, and then they lost to James Madison in the first game. This will be a little bit of a different challenge. Look, they're better than Montana, so they should win this game.
And James Madison last year was a much better team than this Montana team.
Yes. My major concern for Wisconsin is if they get past Montana, and I assume they will play BYU, because I think they will get by VCU. Now you're playing BYU in Denver. Cougars, huge, huge fan base in the state of Colorado. Okay, so BYU is going to be the de facto home team, even though Wisconsin is the higher seed. And you're playing at altitude, something that BYU is very comfortable in. That would be, I think, a major, major hurdle to get past BYU to get to the Sweet 16.
Considered the fan thing, I did not consider the altitude difference between BYU being used to it in Wisconsin, but it's a legitimate factor. And you don't have a lot of time to acclimate to it playing on Thursday and playing on Thursday early. As for Oregon's 5-12 matchup against Liberty, this seems to be one that a lot of the pundits out there really like the Flames because of the style that they play. This is kind of a contrast, right? Liberty likes to get up and down. Oregon and Dana Altman, they're always known for defense, but I just look at the way that Nate Biddle has played as of late. Does Liberty have anybody to match up with the Ducks 7-footer?
No, Richie McKay, who does a great job at Liberty. He's bounced around various levels of college basketball. They are a good defensive team, but they've had better teams, and I don't think this is their best team. And Oregon, I actually really like Oregon's draw here. If Jackson Shelstad can play up to his potential and make shots, I mean, we've got, and I'll be there in Seattle with Robbie Hummel and Lisa Byington and Jalen Rose, so we got an all Big Ten crew.
Yep.
I love the fact that we could get a Oregon-Arizona second-round game. Okay, that's an old Pac-12 battle. They've had plenty of great battles over the decades, and you could have Jackson Shelstad and Caleb Love, and that will be a great 4-5 matchup. And if they can get through that and they potentially meet Duke, I think they have the team that could beat Duke. We'll see how healthy Cooper Flagg is. Right. But with Kwame Evans and Nate Biddle, TJ Bamba, who can.
Well, I think the Bamba is so key because if you play Arizona, by the way, playing Akron and former Illinois head coach John Gross, but if it's Caleb Love, I think TJ Bamba is the perfect defensive matchup for Caleb Love for Oregon. I love that matchup. And to your point, if Cooper Flagg is not healthy, and I know Duke still went on to win the ACC even without him, they're a different team.
Yes.
And that's the number one seed that you want to play if you have to play a number one seed in the Sweet 16.
Look, they keep saying he's going to play, but we don't know how effective he's going to play. Will he have the same kind of lift? So all that's TBD to be determined. But I think the fact that of all these different teams, the fact that Oregon got to stay out west in Seattle, I mean, as close as they could be, this is a huge win for the Ducks among all the Big Ten teams that got in terms of placement.
And, of course, Dana Altman, more wins in March than anybody else out there. He's a guy who knows how to do it when it comes to tournament time, trying to do it during the Ducks' first year as a member of the Big Ten. Let's turn our attention to the Midwest region of the 2025 Men's NCAA Tournament. Purdue will open up against the Panthers of High Point. There are two other teams inside this bracket from the Big Ten. Illinois will play either Texas or Xavier. That's one of the first four games, while UCLA opens up against a really dangerous Utah State team. Those head coaches, Jared Calhoun and Mick Cronin, very good friends. Always one of the more interesting parts of this NCAA tournament when you get those kind of connections. Heard at least one so-called expert saying they love High Point. They believe that Purdue is way overseeded. I just look at how much NCAA game experience this team has. I know there's no Zach Edey, but Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, Caleb First, Cam Heide, even Miles Colvin. So many of these guys have played in so many big games. Of course, Trey Kaufman-Renn as well. I just think that experience gets Purdue over the hump in round one.
Yeah, I don't buy it. I'm sorry. But I do question if Purdue could get past Clemson, which could potentially be their second round matchup. And the reason being, we all saw it in Indy. This Purdue team is not in sync right now. They need a reset big time over the next few days. They need to defend better. We saw Braden Smith in that huddle yelling at his teammates to get going. There clearly is something not meshing right now with this squad. They've got a few days to figure it out because once they get in that weekend game, you don't have any time to sort of reset. It has to happen in the next 48 hours. And I don't know if it can. We'll have to see because Clemson is more than capable of taking them out if we're going to project to a second-round matchup. Chase Hunter is an exceptional guard for the Tigers. He's got great experience, helped lead them to the Elite Eight. Ian Shefflin inside, he can definitely match up. He's a big body with Trey Kaufman-Renn. So they've got the answers for Purdue, and those guys have experience of advancing to the Elite Eight.
I would counter that I think Clemson's first-round matchup against McNeese is not exactly a given. And
True.
Secondly, there are a lot of rumors swirling around Clemson right now, and Brad Brownell, a guy who may be on his way to a different job. There are some who believe he's one of the favorites in the running for the open job at Indiana. We know where Matt Painter's going to be next year. And to me, if there's anybody who can get his team back to where it needs to be before tournament time, Painter's that guy.
Yes, and I think a lot of it will also have to be leadership from Braden Smith, from Trey Kaufman-Renn, and to some extent Fletcher Lawyer, because those are the three players that have the most experience on this roster advancing deep in the tournament. So we'll see, but it's going to be a challenge this week. There's no question about it.
Perhaps the biggest challenge for Illinois, who's a 6th seed in that region, and Brad Underwood spoke about this, is now you have to get ready for 2 teams, not just one, because you have both Texas and Xavier as possible opponents, because those 2 teams will meet in the first 4. First, though, let's discuss the seeding, because I think a lot of folks believe this is a positive sign for Illinois. The committee gave them a 6th seed. There were many projections that had them as a 7 or perhaps even an 8.
And location matters. And so I mentioned Oregon and Seattle. You can make the argument Michigan State and Cleveland. This would probably be, if to me, Oregon is 1, this is 1A, with Illinois being in Milwaukee. Great sign for the Illini. They will be there in force, obviously, with a neighboring city and a state. So I think they will have great fan support. Now, the problem is, I'm going to project that it's going to be Texas. Texas, I thought, finished the season better than Xavier, and they've got an absolute stud in Trey Johnson. I mean, he's going to be a lottery pick, and he can go for 30 and has gone for 30. So it's going to come down to how they defend.
And Illinois has had issues defensively, obviously, as we saw against Maryland.
It's all about, I mentioned this about Purdue. I mean, if there are 2 teams from the Big Ten, maybe 2 teams in this entire bracket, that we just don't know what's going to happen. I think they're both from this league in Purdue and Illinois. They've got the talent to get to San Antonio. They both can win 4 games to get there. But they've not been in sync at the right time. Illinois, I know they've had health issues, sickness and injuries, but we've seen 2 awful performances in the last month against Duke in Madison Square Garden, and then the other day against Maryland.
I would say this, though, Andy, and I know Illinois fans are probably tired of hearing this. You compared them to Purdue as teams that have been up and down. I actually think the Illinois ceiling when they play to their capability is much higher than Purdue's. When all of their players are playing the way that they can play on both ends of the floor, I think their ceiling is not to Auburn's level, but it's as good as anybody who's maybe a number 2 seed in this bracket.
But the problem is, and you and I were both there, is they can look so good. And I know Iowa, you can't compare them defensively with Maryland, but how they look one night and the ability to score of 100 points, and then the next night they can't
How
score.
frustrating must that be to a coaching staff, too?
They can't even score the next day. I mean, it literally was a complete 180 from one day to the next. And so that's what we don't know. And now they got to prep for 2 different styles, 2 different teams in advance of this matchup here in the first round after the first 4.
Then it'll be a full week off for Illinois because that'll be a Friday night game in Milwaukee and one of the late games as well, as they will play again either Texas or Xavier. The third matchup for the Big Ten inside this bracket is one of the newcomers, UCLA. Mick Cronin not at all pleased with his team's performance in Indianapolis. I spoke with him after the first half, and he gave me 4 words: our performance is embarrassing. He calmed down a little. We heard from him on Sunday night after the Bruins were selected as a 7 seed to take on Utah State as a 10. First-year head coach in Calhoun at Utah State. But this is a program that expects to not just go to the NCAA tournament, but win games. This is anything but a given in the 7-10 for the Bruins.
True, but the Utah State team this year is not as good as the one last year from Danny Sprinkle. They kind of sputtered down the stretch. I will say this. I will be absolutely shocked if Mick Cronin complains about travel in this instance. This is perfect for Mick. He coached at Cincinnati. I mean, Lexington to Cincinnati.
He can run down to Keeneland and watch some ponies.
This is right in his wheelhouse. A lot of times you fly into Cincinnati to go to Lexington. He's going to have plenty of fans, family, friends coming in from, Southern Ohio, Northern Kentucky. I think he actually will be thrilled that he's back in his neighborhood.
Well, he might be thrilled about the
game.
location, but if his team plays the way that it played against Wisconsin, he's not going to be very happy with the friends and family watching what they watch.
True, but I have more faith, believe it or not, in UCLA resetting than I do to some degree with Illinois and Purdue. Even though I agree with you, of those 3 teams, I think Illinois has the highest ceiling, but just haven't liked the sort of the karma of Illinois and Purdue. UCLA wasn't sort of sniping at each other. They weren't, I don't know, just the bench decorum wasn't the same. I would like to see if UCLA could get back to the way they played against USC the previous Saturday, where their offense was clicking.
To end the regular season, yeah.
Yes. At home, blew out USC. Everything was clicking in that instance. And defensively, they get back to holding teams under 60 or around 60 points. Bilodeau, if he starts playing better, Amara, he could certainly be a problem again with the right matchup. So I like UCLA in this bracket. The only problem is if they advance and they play Kentucky.
That's what I was going to go to.
In Indy, that's where it gets dicey. Because if Kentucky advances to Indianapolis and you play UCLA, by the way, unbelievable.
But by the way, UCLA's potential second-round matchup is against Tennessee. Is that first to 60 wins?
Yes. I'm getting a little ahead of myself because they got to get by Tennessee. Yes.
No. Before we start worrying about Kentucky, we got to worry about the number 2 seed, one of the teams that was one of the best in the country throughout the course of the year. And as good as UCLA is defensively, you could argue that Rick Barnes in Tennessee perhaps even better. Okay, let's get to the West region because the Terps are there. And I know Maryland was disappointed in not winning the Big Ten tournament. A lot of folks had them picked to win down in Indianapolis because of the way they had been playing late in the year. They play a fascinating Grand Canyon team. This should be a really fun matchup in the first round. And then I love their draw if they get past. I love their draw overall, as a matter of fact, because Colorado State played well in the Mountain West to win that tournament and get in. I don't think they can match up with Maryland. I don't think Memphis, and you're not sure about Haggerty right now. I don't think Hunter. I'm sorry. You're not sure about Memphis right now and what they can potentially do. I think Maryland, I hate to say a lock. If I were to pick a team that's outside of a top 2 seed, outside of not just in the Big Ten, anybody, you tell me, pick a 3 or a 4 that you are absolutely confident in to get to the Sweet 16, I would probably roll with the Terps.
I would as well. Yes, this is not Bryce Drew's best team from Grand Canyon. I think Utah Valley was probably the better team in the WAC, but they won the AQ. So they get, but by the way, they lost on a buzzer beater, essentially, to Michigan in the tournament. All their losses were late losses.
The Michigan State 3.
Yeah. Northwestern, Martinelli. So, I mean, they're fine. Maybe they're disappointed. I'll see them in Seattle. But look, they're going to get by Grand Canyon. And then you're right. Tyrese Hunter, they don't know if he's going to play for Memphis. Nick Clifford is phenomenal for Colorado State. Talk about a coach with a distraction. We may be talking about Nico Medved in the Big Ten at Minnesota. We'll see what happens there.
Yes, a lot of rumors that he will be Ben Johnson's successor.
So we'll see what happens. But, so there's a whole potential distraction there. But I do like them getting out of this in the Sweet 16. And then, looking big picture here, I think they have the team to match up with everyone's favorite pick, Florida. If it happens, I could see Maryland beating them and advancing, to the Elite Eight, where they potentially could face a St. John's, a Kansas, a Texas Tech, an Arkansas.
Yeah, I mean
but they have the talent to match up with all of them.
I know Florida won the SEC. They're the darling pick right now from most of the pundits to win it all. But you look at the rest of the top teams in that Maryland draw. St. John's has been really good. I think Maryland easily matches up with St. John's. We already talked about some of these other matchups. You brought up Kansas. I don't know. I don't look at this bracket and see anybody that Maryland would play that scares me. I also think this is a chance. We in the Big Ten know about him.
Yes.
But this is the chance for Derek Queen to become known nationally. Because I think nationally, if folks don't follow the Big Ten, they were still thinking about Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper. Those are the freshmen inside the Big Ten. Derek Queen's the Big Ten Freshman of the Year. Derek Queen, as Kevin Willard said, in a previous era or perhaps with some different circumstances, is the number 1 pick in this summer's NBA draft. This is his chance to let the nation know who Derek Queen is.
And I would argue that this thing about the depth, it's really a non-factor. Just to sort of lay this out again for the viewers here, in the NCAA tournament, the timeouts are longer, a lot of commercials, okay? So the rest is there for a team like Maryland that's only going to play maybe 7 players unless there's foul trouble. Their 5 starters are going to play. The Crab 5 are going to play heavy minutes. They expect them to score the majority of points, but they get rests in the course of a game. And now we're back to every other day. The Big Ten tournament, all these tournaments are every day in a row. That's not the case here. So they will have time to reset, get rest, and I don't think it'll be an issue.
Mid-afternoon game in Seattle for the Terps against Grand Canyon. Crab 5, by the way, one of my favorite nicknames for a collective group in a long, long, long time. And so the league sends 8 teams to the NCAA tournament. We just discussed them all. All first-round favorites, by the way, according to seed. But what about the 2 on the wrong side of the bubble? Our take on the exclusion of Indiana and Ohio State when Big Ten Today returns. As much as we discuss the 68 teams that make the NCAA tournament, there is perhaps as much discussion, certainly as much debate, and perhaps even more disagreement. See Governor, West Virginia. When it comes to the first 4 out, you see the first 4 out listed right there, West Virginia, Boise State, from conferences outside the Big Ten. Our league had 2 teams among the first 4 out, Indiana and Ohio State. Let's quickly start with Ohio State, because even though they were among the first 4 out, I don't think there was as much disagreement about the Buckeyes being left out in comparison to Indiana being left out. And let's just be honest about it. That loss to Iowa in the Big Ten tournament was absolutely the death knell for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, there's no question about it. Iowa kind of took out 2 teams. I mean, Nebraska would have had at least a chance had they been here. They beat them on the final regular season day. I thought that 20-point win over Kentucky way back in December would be on the shelf, and it was, but there were just some egregious losses, like when they lost at home to Northwestern, a depleted Northwestern team. So Ohio State had chances, and they were only 2 games over 500. So I don't really see or hear the outcry that the Buckeyes got omitted, because they had opportunities and they weren't able to get it done.
One of those opportunities was at the end of the regular season when they played Indiana. Now, I know that game was on the road, but they had a lead late into the second half, and both rosters knew that game was perhaps the one that, had they won it and you get to Indianapolis, you feel a little bit more comfortable, or at least you win one game in Indy and you certainly feel like you're in. But that wasn't the case for Indiana, because they did win that game over Ohio State. They also survived the scare from Nebraska earlier in the week before we got down to Indianapolis. They get the 9 seed, which means they have a decent matchup against Oregon. And even though they come up short, most projections had Indiana among the last 4 in. How surprised were you to see Indiana not part of this year's tournament?
Yeah, I had West Virginia and Indiana in. I had Xavier and North Carolina out. And Mike DeCourcy did as well. So we're in agreement there, and I think most people did. I thought Indiana had done enough. And what's kind of crazy is, based on what happened, it kind of makes you think, even if they'd beaten Oregon, would they have gotten in?
Yeah, I think if they beat Oregon, they're in.
So they would have, because they were behind West Virginia based on those
yeah,
numbers.
I think that Oregon win probably gets you in over
Virginia
Texas.
And North Carolina?
Yeah, or perhaps, yeah.
Because North Carolina was the last one in.
I guess that's a good question. I think they leapfrog North Carolina because of Carolina's lack of quad 1 performance. Or are they 1-12?
They were 1-12.
Game, right?
Yeah, so I don't know. I thought they should have been in, and I didn't think Carolina should have been in.
Do you think the committee ever takes into consideration the fact that Indiana had an outgoing coach?
No.
Is that ever a topic of discussion?
I don't think so.
Because folks are asking.
I don't think so, because, I mean, it wasn't an interim coach. It was their same head coach. No. So, I mean, coaches retire or whatever. I mean, I don't think that would have been a factor.
Okay, so both Indiana and Ohio State opting not to continue their seasons after the NCAA exclusion. There is the Crown Tournament, the new tournament that will be broadcast on FS1 and Fox. It's the week leading up to and during the Final Four, and 2 Big Ten teams will be part of the Crown, Nebraska and USC. USC will take on Tulane. That's the second Crown game that we'll see. It's on Tuesday, April the 1st. On the left side of your bracket, toward the bottom there, you see Nebraska against Arizona State. That'll be on the very first day of the Crown on Monday, March the 31st. Fred Hoiberg said after they were knocked off by Iowa, and he kind of knew they weren't going to the Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament, he said, I do believe we'll play in the postseason, and I'm really looking forward to playing in the postseason.
My only concern is, because they weren't in the Big Ten tournament, it's going to be 3 weeks before they play. It's a long time. But Nebraska deserves to play in some form of postseason, so I'm glad they're in the Crown, because they sort of, unfortunately, because they lost 5 straight, and the tiebreaker were omitted from the Big Ten tournament. So I'm glad at least they'll have one more chance. As for USC, hopefully they can stay together, because if Wesley Yates returns, and we can never assume anything anymore.
Right.
But this will be a great opportunity for Yates to get another sort of chance on the big stage, and he could be a phenomenal talent next season in the Big Ten, all Big Ten type player if he comes back. And I have to say if for everything now. And
I would also add this, not to cut you off here, but if all these guys decide to play, just because the teams have accepted the invitation doesn't necessarily mean that all the players are going to play, because there's a lot of coaches, there's a lot of guys potentially in their ear. Think about what the transfer portal could be.
Which opens on the 24th.
This is the day that we live in. And if the transfer portal opens on the 24th and somebody comes and offers you a couple $1 million and you're supposed to play your first game on the 31st, you got some business decisions to make.
Yeah, and I will say this. I think going forward, both in football and men's basketball, because we see a lot of opt-outs and
dates
bowls,
have to be changed.
Or also in their contracts or whatever they're going to have in the future, you don't get all your money until the end of our season.
I just think it's easier to adjust the dates. Change the portal dates and make them make sense with where the tournament is, where spring football is, because otherwise those two things are going to be dramatically hurt. moving forward. All right, we'll head to the women's game next. Autumn Johnson joins us on what was a record-setting showing for the league. A dozen teams getting the tourney nod, including all 4 first-year squads from out on the left coast. It would be understandable if you looked at all these teams and thought we were showing you the bracket for the Big Ten tournament, but in fact, 12 teams from the Big Ten make up the NCAA tournament's largest inclusion ever. That's 2/3 of the entire expanded league, nearly 1/5 of the entire NCAA tournament, and it is led by #1 overall seed UCLA. Bruins head coach Corey Close caught up with Ashley Adamson after the announcement was made on Sunday night.
It's been a record-breaking season here in Westwood, and another record-broken #1 seed, the #1 overall seed. Corey, what did it mean to you when that name got called?
Honestly, just watching the joy in our players' faces and, knowing the things that they needed to improve and overcome to get into that place. And, you get what you earn overall, and I'm really proud of them. And it's a really remarkable thing. Even any #1 seed would have been the highest seed in program history, but to have the #1 overall seed is just really gratifying.
It's hard to explain to people who weren't here what it was like to walk in and see the scene here with the fans, and you guys are having the selection show. The energy around this program right now, I know you've been building it for a long time. What is it like to see it?
Well, and I have to give credit also to USC across town. I think having both programs be really, really good and have this incredible competitive rivalry, I think it brings out the best in both of us, and it's captured our city. There's just a buzz and a vibe around Los Angeles surrounding women's basketball, and we're getting to experience it in our gym today. Sharing it with our fans, not only our fans, our alumni, men's basketball alumni and women's basketball alumni, and then the great season ticket holders that we've had. So, and I just challenged them right now. We've broken about every record this year, but we have not sold out hosting in the first 2 rounds yet. That's our next one, and that's what I hope we show up to do.
Yeah, I know first year in the Big Ten, there was a lot of question marks about what it would be like, and here you guys have this remarkable season. How much did playing in this league prepare you think for what's coming?
Well, and I didn't know what to expect. I thought there was a lot of just learning that was going to happen this first year, but I really want to credit the other coaches in the conference, the great players, and also just the leadership of the Big Ten. I really felt like we were on the cutting edge. With all of the landscape changing, all of the things that were happening, I had great faith in the leadership, and I was really challenged by the other coaches in this league. There's great programs, varied styles of play, and really challenged us to be our best game by game. So really privileged to be in the Big Ten.
Phenomenal stuff from Corey Close as Autumn Johnson joins us. Now, first, I want to go on record as saying I absolutely love Corey Close. She gets it. And the credit that she gave to Lindsey Gottlieb and USC as well, kind of propelling them toward this season, and Autumn being the #1 overall seed. There was some debate, I understand, with the committee. South Carolina certainly had to be in that conversation. Dawn Staley's team played by far the hardest non-conference schedule. What did you hear, Autumn, from the committee in terms of their decision to make UCLA the #1 overall seed for the first time ever?
Yeah, we all knew coming into selections, we were looking at UCLA or South Carolina for that #1 overall seed. And when I was talking to the selection committee, it came down to body of work, head-to-head, and competitive and losses. So for the body of work, obviously with UCLA, what they've been able to do with such a monumental year, the #1 team in the nation for 12 weeks, 13 quad 1 wins, 10 ranked wins, and ultimately becoming the Big Ten champs. That overall had them have that edge over South Carolina. That head-to-head with South Carolina losing by 15 points was massive in November. And then when you look at competitive and losses, that component, UCLA only lost on the season was to USC twice, and South Carolina had an ugly loss on their schedule to UConn by 29 points. So they were very adamant about that was what really did it for South Carolina, and that's how the chips fell. But hey, you see they're on the opposite side of the bracket. We could have a possible rematch, and I think that sets us up perfect here in March. But UCLA, they're a tough draw. You have 6'7" Lauren Betts, and as I look at their path ahead, no one else can say that. UCLA can say down the stretch, we have Lauren Betts and you don't. And I think they have all the pieces that they need to bring home a national championship trophy.
The NC State's the #2 in that region, and as good as Wes Moore's team is, they are really perimeter oriented with 3 terrific guards, but really nobody download a matchup with Lauren Betts, though you could probably say that about just about every team in the bracket. I do want to get a quick thought from you on USC. They're the last #1 seed. How close do you think it was between USC and the top #2 seed, UConn? And how much do you think maybe that win in December by USC over UConn in Hartford was the ultimate decision maker for the committee?
Well, honestly, it came down to a common opponent in Notre Dame, and that's something the selection committee told me when they were looking at both Texas and USC. They were competitive, they thought, more than Southern California. Texas lost in overtime to Notre Dame on the road, and USC lost by 13 at home. They also looked at their net losses. Texas' worst net loss was to #5 Notre Dame, as I just mentioned, and USC's worst loss was to #24 Iowa. So honestly, for me, I had Southern California in that regional 3. And even though it didn't work out that way, I honestly think they won in this scenario. Yes, you had to face UConn, but region 3, that's a gauntlet over there. You have to face Tennessee, Notre Dame, Ohio State. TCU is also very sneaky. You'd be on the same side as South Carolina trying to advance to the championship game, but all you have to worry about is UConn. That's a tall task, I know, but you've done it before. And then potentially UCLA if it falls out like you want to in the Final Four. They've done it twice. So I think overall it worked out, but I understand the frustration.
Yeah, you do have a little bit more of an optimistic view than the Trojans did as to getting that last #1 seed. Here's Lindsay Gottlieb on that very issue from Sunday night.
I never thought I'd be a 1 seed and feel disrespected, but I thought the committee, I thought there would be very little chance we would be the #4 overall #1. And so, we've got a big game here on Saturday against UNCG, and we'll handle it accordingly, but you tell me if you think that bracket that we got should have been the one that it was. I can't speak for the players. I think they're excited to play, but this was not on my bingo card to be a little bit, frustrated after being a 1 seed, and it's not, an arrogance of any kind. I think there's a lot of really good teams, and you got to play the first game in front of you and earn your way from there, and that's what we'll do. But sometimes I don't understand people who make decisions in women's basketball and why they do what they do. And certainly with this committee, I would love to ask some questions.
So, Autumn, I know you painted the picture, but I guess I think what Lindsay Gottlieb is basically getting to is you look at the other 3 regions, and if USC is any other #1 seed, it's not UConn. It's either NC State that I previously mentioned, Duke, or TCU. No disrespect to Westmore and the Wolfpack, same to Duke. Haley Van Lith and TCU are terrific, but I think it's pretty clear that UConn's the most dangerous #2, and I'm guessing that's why Lindsay Gottlieb was a little bit frustrated to be placed where she was.
100%. You just saw this team last year and they knocked you out in the NCAA tournament in the Elite 8. That game came down to single digits. And then you had them again in December. Juju Watkins had a generational game as always and was able to put this team away on the road at that. But to have UConn again, and that is someone who's going to be in your way again. I'm really excited, though, of the storyline of Paige Beckers, obviously Juju Watkins, 2 generational talents going head to head, the bun and the braid going at it. But this is good for women's basketball. I'm really excited. I think Juju Watkins is going to come in with another chip on her shoulder because this ended their historic run in her freshman year. Now she has another shot at it with Kiki Iriafen, with a loaded freshman class. I think they have all the pieces and now the experience to make a deeper run.
The bun and the braid. I've never heard that before. I absolutely love it. And by the way, Paige Beckers, Juju Watkins, my daughter's 2 favorite players. Before the selection show, she asked me, can you call and make sure that they're just not on the same side of the bracket? In fact, they're inside the same region. Sometimes you don't get what you wish for. I think Maryland did get exactly what it was wishing for because Brenda Frese and company did not look good in the Big Ten tournament. Maryland went on a couple of 25-0 runs against them at the hands of Michigan. Defensively, they looked shaky. Offensively, they didn't have their stuff. But body of work, Autumn, they get a top 4, which means they get to start in College Park for the first couple of rounds. And they love their basketball there, their women's hoops. I don't think you can overstate how big that seed was for the Terps.
Major, and that was a hot topic also at the selection committee because it was either Maryland or Ole Miss hosting, and it ultimately came down to Maryland because they had the more wins over top 100 net compared to Ole Miss, and they looked at their last 10 games. Maryland ended the season 7-3, so this team has all the pieces. They brought in 10 new players who were battle tested, battled injuries, adversity, but Brendan Freese always has this team ready for March. I'm excited to see what they do this season with Cheyenne Sellers, Kayleen Schmeichel, Sarah Tibiasu, and Sailor Poffenberger. If she's healthy, this can be a dangerous squad.
I'm glad you used that phrase, if healthy, because that's a big story for Ohio State. The fourth Big Ten team that is at home for the first couple of rounds as a top 4 seed. Buckeyes made a little bit of a run at the Big Ten tournament, but at something of a cost. Cody McMahon got banged up, Jelani Cambridge as well. I think Kevin McGuff has to get that training staff to work some extra hours if he hopes his team can make the kind of run he's looking for.
Yeah, because Jelani Cambridge and Cody McMahon, they're going to be heavily relying on their stars. This is what gets this team going. But I think they're going to be just fine. Teams are going to be going up against their press, which is tough. They force 22 turnovers per game, and they're looking to complete a 40-minute game. That is the main focus at hand, being consistent and sharp. But if they have those 2 stars, I think they can make a deep run.
Getting things started on Friday against Montana State in Columbus. Time for one final break here on Big Ten Today. We're back with some final thoughts from Autumn on which non-number 1 seeds have the best chance to march through this year's NCAA Women's Tournament bracket. It is time for us to take you around the Big Ten. This past weekend, the Indoor Track and Field National Championships, and the Big Ten hoists 2 very large trophies. First, the Oregon women are your Indoor Track and Field National Champions for the 8th time, backing up the Big Ten title. And USC, for the first time since 1972, has claimed the Men's Indoor National Track and Field Championship. Our congrats to both the Ducks and Trojans. Big Ten hockey tournament final is all set. It'll be Michigan State and Ohio State. Spartans shut out Notre Dame 1-0 in the semifinals, followed up by Ohio State's 4-3 win in overtime over Penn State as Gunnar Wolf-Fontaine gets the winner for the Buckeyes. MSU, OSU, 7:30 Eastern this Saturday, right here on the Big Ten Network. Few minutes left with our women's analyst and bracketologist, Autumn Johnson. Autumn, we have not touched on Washington as the Huskies get into the first 4 in their first year inside the Big Ten. What did the committee tell you about placing Tina Langley's team in that Thursday night first 4 game?
Yeah, well, coming in, I was very heavily talking about the 11th seed, for Washington coming in safely in the bracket. All Power 4 conference tournaments wrapped up Sunday, March 9th. But then mid-majors were still playing. And when I asked the selection committee, did that play a part in it? Yeah, because a lot of upsets happen, and that caused bid stealers, specifically in the A10 with Richmond, already an NCAA tournament team. They have a stacked resume, but they lost in their conference tournament. George Mason was able to come out on top on that one. So the bubble and that wiggle room shrunk, which pushed Washington to the last 4 in. But I'm still very confident in this group taking on Columbia for that play-in game. I think they have to rely on their identity, their threes, and that balanced core 4 is always dangerous with Savia Sellers, Elle Ladine, Hannah Steins, Delia Daniels. I think, and I've been saying this all season long, they're a sleeper, and they're going to be a sleeper here in March Madness.
All right, Autumn, we got a minute left. We've talked about the top 4 seeds, just talked about Washington. What about the in-between? Which teams that are not in the first 4 but not hosting first and second round games do you think could make a deep run through this bracket?
Iowa, and again, Iowa. I was saying that during the Big Ten tournament. They were not an 11th seed, in my opinion. They only had 1 double-digit loss the entire season. They took down USC, challenged Ohio State twice, and UCLA, and also Michigan as well. I loved this group all season long. I fell in love with them during the Big Ten tournament, so I think they can shake things up. We saw how they, were able to storm past Maryland in the Big Ten tournament. That could be another sleeper here in March Madness.
3 freshman starters for Kim Barnes-Rico, and still a great run in Indy, and a favorite pick for a lot, not just Autumn Johnson, coming up in the women's tournament. Let the games begin. We got to wait a few more days for Autumn and Andy. I'm Rick. Thanks for the hang on Big Ten Today.